I thought it was time that everyone who was not in the last and great war should learn a little about the life and times of the private, doe or just plain soldier who helped free the world for democracy. Many have read the books written by generals, chiefs of staff, and heads of state about World War II. I wonder just how many people know what the war was like from the private's point of view. Only other privates, I'm sure. That is why, after all these years, I decided to tell my story and my memories of the great world struggle. The story was written to be interesting to everyone, and hopefully it will be intriguing as well for my children and grandchildren. The war was already in Europe when I was drafted to serve in the military. Most everyone waited to be called rather than volunteer for service because one learns early in life never to volunteer for anything. In my case, there was a slight difference. I was married with a beautiful wife, Isabel, and a baby daughter, Joan, so there was no I would have left them intentionally. On the other hand, strange as this may sound, I wanted to be a part of what was happening in Europe and to take part in the greatest conflict in the history of the world. Patriotism, the love of one's country, was taught in the home and in the school and became as much a part of a person as their religion. The conflict between my strong religious faith and my equally strong belief that it was my duty to serve my country gave me many uneasy thoughts. All this was resolved, and it was none of my doing. Up to this time, my job as a machinist in the defense industry in New Jersey had given me draft deferments until the government decided it needed soldiers more than defense workers. And then, one day, a letter came in the mail, signed by the President of the United States of America, Franklin D. Roosevelt, inviting me to defend our country in its hour of need. How could I refuse such a personal appeal? It was like getting an invitation to a prom with the promise of being able to join in the dancing. My problem or dilemma was settled. I was drafted with no more deferrals granted. Drafting a young father placed a very heavy burden on his wife and the rest of the family. Now it was the woman who was strong, who persevered and had to carry on. The saving factor, if there was one, was that there were so many women in the same situation. While the women were saddled with added responsibility, worry, shortages because of rationing, and just trying to make ends meet, the men were off having a good time with the guys, playing with guns, drinking beer in the PX, traveling to all parts of the world, and just plain having fun. It was just not fair, but no one ever said life was fair. It was just the draw of the straw, so to speak. We had our tearful farewell, and to reassure Isabel, I told her that I was a survivor, and that I would come home and spend the rest of my life making her happy. Whether or not my words consoled her, I don't know, but I really believed everything I said. Guns were as familiar to me as old friends, for I had been shooting a rifle at targets from the time I was 7 years old, and shooting a shotgun from age 12. Proficiency with guns would be the key to staying alive. Before going any further, I should mention that I was 25 years old at the time I was inducted and had been on my own since I was 18. A year was spent in the CCC which was the Civilian Conservation Corps. This organization was formed to help the unemployed and financially state forests. It was good, healthy outdoor work, distressed youth of America by making jobs for them in national, and it was run by the military, although not as an official part of the Army. We were paid $40 a month, of which $3,200 was sent home to my mother, and $8,000 was given to each of us. It was here I learned how to get along in a male-only society. Because I had found a job on one of my trips home, I was released 1 month early from the CCCs. My job with the Delaval Steam Turbine Co. had a starting wage of $0.371 $2 per hour. When my pay reached $2,500 a week, Isabel and I decided to get married. We were only married 1 month before war was declared, and our first child was born the following year. I give you this condensed story in the hopes that this may explain some of my actions and the I conducted myself in the military. In other words, I was not some wide-eyed, naive kid. Induction into the Army took place at Fort Dix, NJ, only about 20 miles from home. After being inducted en masse, we were issued clothing, toilet articles, and such things as the Army thought important. One of the items that was very important was an identification tag with my very own number on it. This was to help the military identify me in a case I was wounded or killed. The tag had a hole in it and was strung on a chain, which I was to wear around my neck. These became known throughout the services as dog tags. Everyone got one and wore it. All the clothes given me were a little big, and the explanation was, "You'll put on weight." My boot size was measured by barefoot, holding a bucket of water in each hand. "What's your foot size?" I was asked. 8½ D, I replied. Me standing, "Give the man a 9C," was the order. The Army was very scientific, and in this case correct. The first day had not ended, and already I disliked the Army. That evening, when I was in the chow line getting my tray filled, one of the KPs grabbed my tray and tugged on it. Angrily, I looked up and saw the smiling face of Tom Flanagan, a friend with whom I had worked and hunted. Now, that was a nice coincidence. We were assigned to the same basic training center at Fort Robinson, Arkansas, and shared the same barracks, which made life a little easier. The concept of basic training was a well-thought-out plan by the military to toughen the body and mind of the new recruit. They were very successful, as witnessed by the number of soldiers who went overseas to kill or be killed. The top commanders of the armed forces of the United States must have had access to a think tank that presented them with the problem: how do you get several militia people to fight a war not of their doing or choosing? One word comes to mind: hate. And how do you accomplish that? With propaganda. Basic training was simply to fine-tune that hate and give it direction, and was, as the records show, tremendously successful. Even though I knew what was going on, it worked with me as well. Perhaps too well. It taught me to hate the enemy, and that the enemy was anyone or anything that would put my life in jeopardy. Even though basic training was tough, it wasn't all work. We had time off in the evenings to go to the PX for a snack and a beer. We didn't get fed very much, especially the in-evening meal. If it was the weekend and we weren't on detail, Flanagan and I could go into town to the USO for free snacks and sodas, and meet with the guys to talk and kid around. There was always a piano, and always someone to play it. It never ceased to amaze me the number of musicians who were in the service. It wouldn't be long before there was a crowd around the piano singing. This occurred in every canteen that I visited, be it in the States or Europe. It was a volunteer organization that ran them, and there were quite a few women who volunteered to help out, from young girls to older ladies. They even helped some of the fellows write letters home. In a way, it was made to be a home away from home, and certainly filled the need to get away from the military, even for a few hours. A lot of recruits got homesick, and the USO helped. I believe now that I think about it, that places in Berlin and Frankfurt were called Red Cross canteens, but did virtually the same thing. This, of course, was after the war. Training for me ended in December, but Tom Flanagan's training ended earlier. On our last march at night of 25 miles, Flanagan had to drop out because of breathing problems and was taken to the Army hospital for evaluation. Army doctors determined that he was suffering from an acute asthma attack and would not continue training. The surprising thing about all this was that I had always suffered from allergies and asthma, but I never had an attack during basic training or the time I spent in Europe. Tom Flanagan and I were buddies and would have continued as such, but it was not meant to be. Being very outgoing, I made many acquaintances in the service, but only a few close friends. Before being sent overseas, I was given a few days to go home and see my family before reporting to Fort Meade, a replacement depot outside of Baltimore, Maryland. Needless to say, I made the most of the hours I spent with Isabel and Joan. This time frame was during the Christmas holiday season. Among the gifts that I received was a wool sweater that looked exactly like a military issue. Maybe it was. It was given to me by the mother of one of my best friends, Bill Delosier, a lieutenant in the infantry. This sweater would cause me a little trouble later on. Isabel gave me a gold chain bracelet with my name and serial number on it that I wore through the war and a long time afterward. Other than love, there really wasn't much that a soldier could take with him that wouldn't have to be discarded later. Upon reporting to Fort Meade, I was assigned to a barrack with some of the men who had also taken basic training at Camp Robertson. Being with guys that I knew made things a little more pleasant. Maybe I should explain what an army barrack looked like on the outside as well as the inside. The buildings were rectangular in shape and varied in size. Some were even multi-story, but they all have about the same layout. Bunks lined both sides of the walls of the long side of the building, with the head end of the bunk to the wall and the foot end facing out, which formed an aisle in the center. There was space enough between the bunks for a man to walk and maneuver to make up his bunk each morning. At the foot of each bed was a large wooden or metal box that served as a storage cabinet where clothes and personal items could be kept. These were called foot lockers. The sleeping area for the men was open and took up about 1/2 of the building. The rest of the building held the toilets, called a latrine, showers, and a room for a non-com in charge of the barrack. It was the task of the replacement depot to assign troops to the various theaters of the war. Because of the secrecy involving the movements of troops, we were not officially informed about where we were going or when we would go. The when part of the equation was soon, and the where wasn't hard to figure out. If we were going to the Pacific, we would be in a depot on the West Coast, not on the East Coast. From the warm wool clothing issued to us, we deduced we were going to where it was cold, therefore Europe. Another duty of the personnel of the repel depots was to see that we had all the equipment and all the clothing that we would need in our future endeavors. This included issuing us our weapons, which were .30 caliber semi-automatic rifles called the M1. To my surprise, the rifle given to me had seen better days. It looked beat up and worn, with the stock dirty and dented. When I took it apart, I found that outside of a little wear everything, including the barrel, was fine and would perform adequately. These rifles, for the most part, had been picked up from the battlefields, sent back to the States to an Army Ordnance Center to be checked, repaired, if necessary, and reissued. The non-com in charge of our barracks informed us that there would be an inspection to make sure that we had all the necessary clothing before being shipped out. We were to lay out all the articles of clothing on our bunks, and we were instructed as to how and where they wanted them placed. Everything had to be laid out in just one certain way. Perhaps that made it easier to examine. The inspectors usually would be a junior officer and a non-commissioned officer. We were also told that we were to stand at attention at the foot of our bunks when ordered to do so, giving the officer a clear view of the articles on each bed. The door of the barrack opened, and we were called to attention. When I looked up, I was surprised to see a major with a sergeant. What kind of a major was this, I thought? Either he had screwed up somewhere or was some soda jerk given a commission. I watched from the corner of my eye as the inspectors went from bunk to bunk, sometimes making comments. Finally, they came to mine. "The major soldier," he said, "you have too many sweaters." "Yes, sir," I answered. "One is a gift I received at Christmas." I went on to explain how I got the sweater, throwing in as many sirs as I could. "That looks like government issue," he went on. "I know it does, sir, but it is not. It belongs to Mary." I was trying to keep my voice level. "Sergeant," the major ordered, "pick up that sweater." I could feel the hair rising on the back of my neck and the skin tightening on my forehead, which wasn't a good sign. The sergeant stepped forward. "Sergeant, do not touch that sweater." The sergeant stopped. "Sergeant, I gave you an order. Do it." The major barked. The sergeant did not move, as I drilled him with my eyes. "Sergeant, tell your officer if he wants that sweater to pick it up himself." It was so quiet you could hear your own pulse. I could see the indecision and frustration and anger in the Major's face. Without so much as a goodbye, the Major turned and stormed out, not bothering to finish his inspection. Score 1 for the private. Each soldier had 2 pair of leather boots, very comfortable if you could keep them dry. Back in the 40s, there was no such thing as waterproof leather. It was before silicone. The only things available were home remedies, but the Army had a product called Dubin that I was familiar with from my CCCC days. I found out that while this might make the leather water-resistant, it caused the leather to lose its insulating qualities because it filled the pores with grease. There were better ways. The British, in their wet climate, didn't use rubbers over their shoes, but used a good grade of shoe polish. Over the years, I found that worked as well as or better than anything else. Of course, rubber-laced boots or goulashes would have been a better choice, but the Army didn't have any. Talk about being prepared. An order was given that we were to Dubin our boots immediately, and cans of Dubin were handed out. Everyone got right to work on their boots, except me. "Aren't you going to Dubin your boots, E-Man?" one of the guys asked. "No, I sure as hell ain't," I replied. Dubin is no good for boots because it makes the leather cold, and it won't keep your feet warm, I explained. "What do you use?" "I use the best shoe polish I can buy, putting it on my boots, making sure to get it in all the seams, then I brush with a shoe brush to even it out. That's all. That's all. But I make sure I get it into where the sole of the boot is sewn on to the top." "What are you going to tell the Major when he comes around?" "I'll think of something." It wasn't long before I had to think of something, because the Major showed up with his sergeant in tow for his chicken shit inspection. Chicken shit was and is a term used in the Army by the soldiers to describe an insignificant, meaningless, carrying out his inspection, finally stopped at my bunk. Petty, unimportant order or command. Again I watched as the Major, "Is there any reason why your boots aren't Dubined as ordered, soldier?" "Yes, sir." And I went on to tell him why it was not the right thing to do. "I gave you an order to Dubin your boots. Are you going to obey or not?" His voice was raising in volume. "No, sir, I'm not. These are my feet, and I'm taking good care of them." I kept my voice in a conversational tone. "I've had enough of your insolence, soldier. If you don't shape up in a hurry, you won't be shipping out with your unit." He was now shouting. He was losing it. "Oh, thank you, sir. That's the best news I've had since I've been here. I'm quick going to call my wife and tell her." The Major could no longer talk. He sputtered. He turned on his heel and exited, almost running. "E-Man, you're crazy. You're going to get in a lot of trouble," the guys said, almost in unison. "No, I'm not. Think about it. What in the hell can they do to me? Keep me here? I think not. They need every man, and they'll ship us out of here as soon as they can." As soon as they can came sooner than I thought. A sergeant entered and ordered us to listen up. "You're moving out tomorrow morning at 0800 with all your gear. Are there any questions?" I didn't have any, and I didn't hang around to hear any. The announcement came a little after 9 in the morning. Losing no time, I got to a phone and called Isabel at her work to tell her the news. She seemed to take the news in stride and told me that she was going to call the train station to find out the time of the next train to Baltimore and that she would be on it. "Give me the number of the phone that you're using and I'll call you right back," Isabel said, and called me back in only a couple of minutes and said she was leaving for the station immediately and would arrive in Baltimore about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I informed her that I would be at the station to meet her. Because we were in transit, so to speak, we controlled our own time, as long as we were where we were supposed to be at the time we were to be there. At 0800, I would be ready to move out. It was before noon that I walked into the train station to find out the schedule for arrivals. The ticket agent was very helpful and told me that the next train would pull in about 1 o'clock from Trenton. Good, I thought. I'll have time to grab a sandwich. Walking out of the station, I tried to remember where I had seen a luncheonette or a sandwich shop. One was close by, but where? While I was contemplating my next action, 2 girls approached me and asked if they could treat me to lunch. This had never happened to me before, not even remotely. Girls were never attracted to me, so their actions took me completely by surprise. Speechless, I stood there like some dummy until I could finally tell them that I was there to meet my wife. "That's all right. We would like to take you to lunch anyway," they answered. "Well, thank you very much. I would love to go." They took me to a little restaurant about a half a block away. I asked for a cup of soup and a sandwich, and by the time I finished, I had told them the whole story. "That is just so romantic," they gushed. It turned out that they had just felt sorry for a lonely-looking soldier. Their boyfriends were in the service, and they knew what it was like to be separated. Good luck was their parting words as they went their way, and I mine. As I headed back to the station to wait for Isabel, I wondered why I had not taken their offer at face value instead of getting flustered. Not many things made me uneasy, but women always did. The voice that came over the loudspeakers, announcing the coming and going of all the trains, sounded exactly like the voice in every other station. It was like a recording, but you knew it couldn't be, because every arrival and departure would be different. As I was listening for the announcement of that special train from New York, I could feel a rising excitement knowing that I would be seeing Isabel. She was not only the light of my life, she was my whole life. It was she who taught me to laugh and love. When she smiled, her eyes smiled. She was just a totally upbeat, vivacious person, and she was mine. My love for her filled my entire being. Never in my wildest dreams did I think one person could love another so completely. In my dreams of fantasy, Isabel was always the no one else. Wasn't that strange? Woman. Finally the words "train from New York to Washington" arriving on track. Quickly I rushed to the platform to see the train coming into the terminal. It slowed and stopped, and quite a few people got off. Impatiently, I scanned the passengers, and there she was. She must have seen me at the same time as I saw her, for her face lit up with recognition. I ran to meet her, apologizing to the people that I bumped on my way, and took her in my arms for a hug and kiss. Her words came tumbling out. "I came right from work," she reminded me. "I don't have clothes and very little money, and I have to wire home and have Mother send me some." "Let's go to the hotel and see if we can get a room and see if we can call home from there," I said as calmly as I could. Arm in arm, oblivious to the cold, we walked to the hotel across the street from the station and went up to the front desk. "What can I do for you?" asked the clerk without any cordiality whatever. It must be remembered that in those days hotels would not permit unmarried couples to occupy their rooms. A soldier and a pretty girl without luggage were highly suspicious. "We would like a room for tonight, please," I answered. Appeared. "Are you married?" was the next question. With that, the manager, "Yes, we are," Isabel stated, and directed her attention to the manager and told him the whole story of the day's events, and she added, "We don't have any money, but if I can use your phone, I'll call home and have my mother wire me some. Could I have it sent here?" "Yes, you can. And yes, we have a room," he said in a friendly, sympathetic voice. Perhaps he had children who might have been in a similar situation. The war brought out a lot of generosity and sympathy in people, and most wanted to help a serviceman and his family. He gave us a room number and a key. "Do you have any idea how long it might take for the telegram to get here?" I asked. "Only the time it takes for the sender to get to the Western Union office. But don't worry, it will come." "I can't thank you enough for your kindness. Isabel hasn't eaten since breakfast, so we'll go for something to eat." "Do you have any money?" "We have enough for dinner, thank you." Can you imagine a hotel manager doing something like that today? Times were different then, with all our lives in turmoil. Think how much courage it must have taken for Isabel to leave Trenton with only enough money for a train ticket, without knowing what would happen after she got to Baltimore. What an incredible woman. Between us we had sufficient funds for our dinner, with a little left over. Of course, it was a very modest meal, eaten leisurely and deliberately to allow time for the messenger to get to the hotel. The telegram with the money was waiting for us at the front desk. What a relief it was to know that at least we would have a room and a place to sleep. The room was very nice. It even had a phone and a radio, which we didn't use. But we did call home to say everything was all right, and we could say hello to Joan. Joan was 2 years old and could talk well enough to hold a conversation. When she was born, she was a beautiful doll, not wrinkled and red like some babies. Being the first child of our family and friends, she was adored by everyone. Needless to say, she was the apple of my eye, and has always remained such. What with making love, talking, planning, and tears, the night went all too quickly. It was very early morning when I left to go back to camp to make reveille. My time on the bus was spent thinking of what had transpired and praying that Isabel would get home safely. Getting home safely from the war would become my top priority. and I knew that I would live out my life with Isabel and Joan. Promptly at 0800, we moved out. A train took us to Camp Miles Standish outside Boston, Mass. It felt like the coldest place on the planet, with the strong wind coming off the water, cutting through our clothing as if we weren't wearing any. That night, we were loaded on a Liberty ship, shown to our quarters and assigned bunks. Mine was next to the cold steel hull. Everything was done in total darkness to disguise the fact that troop ships would be leaving the harbor. I made up my bunk as quickly as I could, visited the head, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The roll of the ship, with all the creaking, put me to sleep. It had been a very long day. Daylight was long in coming that cold December morning. The troops had been up and had their breakfasts. The mess hall was placed in the center of the ship, where the pitching and bucking would be at a minimum. The various sections of the boat had specific dining times. When you got to the dining area, you got in line, and when it came your turn, you got a tray. Food was placed on it, and you found an empty spot at one of the long, high tables. You stood to eat, usually holding on to the tray with one hand and eating with the other. As the days passed by and the weather worsened, fewer and fewer made I the chow line. Sometime after breakfast, I went up on deck to look around. Wherever I looked, in all directions, I saw ships. Sometime during the night, we had joined a convoy. Dispersed among the troop ships were Navy vessels, mostly destroyers. The ships in the convoy traveled in total blackout and radio silence, lest the enemy be warned. Positions were assigned each ship, and it was up to the captain to keep his craft in its correct place in the fleet. The convoy never went on a straight path for any length of time, but changed direction periodically. This was to prevent being ambushed by a submarine pack. The fleet moved only as fast as the slowest boat. So we were vulnerable to attack by the German U-boats. A gun emplacement was on the fantail of every merchant ship, and was manned by the Navy. The ship's crews were members of the Merchant Marine, and were paid very well for their time at sea, while the gunners were Navy personnel, getting Navy pay which was a lot less. Every day I spent most of my time on deck, observing the flotilla, and each day it seemed to me that the seas were getting higher. All the waves had white caps. The bow of the ship would plow into the oncoming waves, bury under the wall of water, then laboriously rise to send sheets of water everywhere. When I asked one of the ship's officers if this was a bad storm, he said, "No, this is the North Atlantic in the winter time and quite normal actually." How thankful I was that I was in the Army, because when I was inducted I had selected the Navy. Talk about being lucky. I had watched the destroyers every time that I was on deck, fighting their way into the towering seas, lifting out of the water on the crests until most of the hull was clear of the ocean, then falling into the troughs to repeat the process over and over endlessly. They looked too small to be so far from land. It was fascinating to watch, and only the cold would drive me inside. The sea reflected the mood of the sky. When the skies were gray and stormy, the ocean became ominous and dark, almost black and threatening as it hissed by, sending a warning to those foolhardy enough to enter or unlucky enough to fall in. It was just such a day that I was alone on deck, at least I didn't see anyone, that I witnessed an event that I will never forget. Off our port side, about a quarter of a mile away, struggled a destroyer. It was small, probably an old War World I destroyer that was recommissioned because we were short of such craft, and they were needed for escort duty. Even to my untrained eye, it appeared to be having trouble with the very high swells, and its bow would go into